Hi guys, this is Andrew with Headphones.com. Welcome to the Headphone Show, and today we're going to do an entry-level IEM comparison, specifically between the Moondrop SSR, the Blon BL05, and the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus. Now, I want to begin by saying that these are not necessarily the best in-ear monitors that you could get for the price, but these are among the newer ones that have come out from some of these companies that are making a lot of these, high-value budget IEMs. Specifically, Moondrop is really well known for their Starfield and their Blessing 2, and then the SSR is their super entry-level budget IEM that comes in right at around $40. The Blon BL05 is the successor to the Blon BL03, which was a very well-known IEM that was also fairly inexpensive, and this one comes in right at around $43. And the Tin Hi-Fi T2, whoopsie daisy, see that's a little bit of a thicker cable here. The Tin Hi-Fi T2 is an IEM that comes in right at around $50. I think it's on sale right now for $50, so it's between $50 and $60. But in general, the difference in price among these is around $10. Really, it's not that much, and the difference I don't think should be a barrier for anybody who's looking at potentially buying one of these. As far as packaging and accessories goes, there is some difference among them as well, but this video is going to primarily be covering the sound differences that exist, and I do want to note that for all of them, it's fairly minimal on the accessory side of things, but that's actually okay because these are fairly budget IEMs, so I'm fine with that. The SSR and the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus were sent to me by Shenzhen Audio, and the Blon BL05 was sent to me by Hi-Fi Go. I'll leave links in the description where you guys can check them out, but just to be clear, these are not affiliate links. I do not make any money if you do buy them. But there may be good reasons to buy them, and let's talk about some of them here in this video. To begin with, for all of them, I have to say, I'm really impressed that it's possible to get this good bass and treble extension from a highly budget IEM. For all of them, you get really good treble extension. It doesn't roll off. And same thing with the bass performance. It's surprising what's possible now with budget IEMs. And I do want to mention that these are all using dynamic drivers in here, and so they do all have the sort of dynamic impact and slam that you might get from a dynamic driver, but there are some differences. Specifically, the SSR is using, SSR by the way stands for Super Spaceship Reference. This one is using a beryllium-coated dynamic driver. The Blon BL05 is using the typical sort of carbon nanotube thing. The Tin T2 Plus is using a nickel zinc alloy diaphragm here. But basically, they're all using some different type of dynamic driver. So this is likely where some of that bass performance comes in. But then also, they're doing stuff with materials for the coating of the diaphragm that allows you to get really good treble extension there as well. So let's dive right in and talk about how they compare for different aspects of the sound. I am going to tell you, how the differences among them, but I'm also going to let you know which one I prefer because I do have a clear favorite among these. So let's begin by talking about detail retrieval and image clarity and all that stuff. The upper treble seems to have a decent amount of detail here, and this could be in part due to the beryllium coating on the diaphragm, which generally allows for a little bit better, finer detail there in the treble. With these other two, I think they're both actually surprisingly good for the price, but I do want to say that I prefer the bass detail of the Blon BL05, and not just because it's elevated, but actually just there is a little bit more texture that comes through, and I think it has to do with the fact that this may have a little bit more sub-bass presence there, while the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus is a little bit more, mid-bass and upper bass focused there. But also the bass, we'll talk about the frequency response here in a little bit, but the way that the bass elevates on the BL05 is a little bit more contoured, while the Tin 2 Plus is not. And so the bass definition and detail isn't quite as clear on the Tin T2 Plus. But for the rest of the aspects for the frequency response, I'd say they're actually pretty close, with maybe a slight edge to the T2 Plus. But not really by much. And I have to say that these are all entry-level IEMs, so their technical performance is really not that great in comparison to some of the higher-end stuff. It's more can they extend well, and they do. So that's kind of the impressive thing here. For dynamics, these are all excellent actually, with the one exception again being that with the SSR, because the bass is not as elevated here, it doesn't give you as good punch and slam and impact, while both the BL05 and the Tin T2 Plus both give you really good punch definition, slam, and impact. It's a little more noticeable again on the BL05 because of the more contoured bass shelf that it has. And so it's not quite as distinct here, but that's more to do with frequency response than overall dynamic impact and slam. They both sound lively in that sense. For soundstage, once again, both the BL05 and the TIN T2 Plus do a better job of even distribution of images, while the SSR here, I find that is actually something that I'm not a huge fan of. You do get good lateral definition left and right, but it feels like the center image is just like not there somehow, while both the other two are a little bit more filled in. But again, neither of these are particularly wide or spacious sounding to me. They both sound, appropriate for the price that they come in at for soundstage, and not too bad actually just in general for IEMs. For timbre, I don't really have a problem with any of them. With both the TIN T2 Plus and the SSR, I think they do come in a little bit behind as far as timbre goes compared to the BL05. And this may, again, just be the difference in material that's being used for the diaphragm. But I also think that, at this price point and the differences in frequency response that we have here, it's very likely that that's responsible for it as well. But specifically, again, in the bass, I notice that the BL05 is a little more natural sounding in the bass, while the TIN T2 Plus sounds almost a little bit strained there in the bass, and so it just doesn't have quite that same kind of natural decay that I like from a good dynamic driver in the bass. But it's still not bad. It's still better than a balanced armature driver there. Now, let's talk about the frequency response, because this is where the biggest differences lie with these. Starting with the SSR here, the SSR, whoopsie daisy. Oh my goodness, what have I done? It's like when you're doing an IEM comparison, everything just like will inevitably tangle together on the desk. For the SSR, the bass is quite a bit below the other two. It's a little bit more of that sort of traditional linear bass rather than that more preference-based fun kind of tuning. You don't get any bass elevation here like you might with the others. And then when it moves into the mid-range, it's generally okay, but around 3K hertz, there's a substantial elevation for this IEM. Too much for my taste. And actually, it's not unlike many of the other Moondrop IEMs in this region. It's just that the overall balance emphasizes this 3K hertz elevation a little bit too strongly. Overall, this presentation ends up being a little bit on the shouty and shrill side for my taste. The Blon BL05 is quite a bit more bass elevated by contrast, and to be honest, it's just a little bit too emphasized for my taste. But the nice thing about the bass here is that it does come down at an appropriate spot, so it doesn't bleed into the mids, like some of those crazy bass heavy IEMs do. This is an appropriate bass shelf, at least in my opinion. And then it does also have some mid-range presence. Actually, it's got quite a bit of upper mid-range presence here, more so than lower mid-range presence. And then the treble is decently smooth, but a little bit relaxed. This is overall quite a bit more of a fun kind of sound signature, V-shaped kind of sound, with a little bit of a peak there in the upper mids, like around 2K hertz. But I don't mind it that much, to be honest. It's only occasionally that it comes across as a little bit, nasally there for certain things. And there is a little bit of a balance issue there for the treble, where I want to say like right around 4.5K hertz or 5K hertz, the fundamental tone there is emphasized over the rest of the treble. And that means that you do get just a hint of percussion compression. But it turns out that on the TIN T2 Plus, you also get a little bit of that. For the TIN T2 Plus, the bass here I think is actually the nice middle ground. Now, I do wish it were a little bit more present there in the sub bass, so you'd have a little bit more of an even bass presentation, but the overall level for the bass here I think is the sweet spot between the two. It's a fun, engaging kind of bass, but it's not too much that that's all you're really hearing. And then you do also get a little bit more upper bass, so for your rock music and stuff like that, where the bass tones token the upper bass frequencies more than the full frequency range, you do get a little bit more presence there on the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus. For the mids, it's a bit weird looking here in the frequency response graph, but I find that the mids are generally okay. It's a little bit more of a relaxed tuning there with You do get upper mid-range presence, but again, it's not on the same kind of, shrillness level as the other two. So this is a bit more of a relaxed upper mid-range presence that I kind of like. For at least for IEMs, it doesn't have as much of that sort of nasally or shrillness quality to it. And then for the treble, it is also really well extended here, and the balance for the treble is quite good. There's no significant issues throughout the consonant range. It's not, gritty or overly sharp in the treble or anything like that. To my ear, the only thing to nitpick, I think, about the TIN T2 Plus is there's a bit of 5K hertz percussion compression issues caused by a bit of a peak there, meaning that the fundamental tone for cymbal hits is once again a little bit elevated and emphasized, but because there's a bit more overall treble energy, it's not as out of balance for the resonant harmonic tones there, and this means that your cymbal hits do still crash through appropriately. So overall, you have your slightly brighter tuned IEM without the bass presence in the SSR. You have your more kind of bassy, fun kind of V-shaped sound here with the Blon BL05. And then you have your Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus, which fits kind of between the two there. And I'm going to say that my preference among each of these is actually the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus. It's mostly because this is the one that doesn't have that mid-range shoutiness issue that I find to be present on both of the other two. And I think beyond just preference, I think this may actually come down to what the gain factors are for my ear that, the manufacturers have to assume. And what ends up working for my ear most commonly, I find, is a little bit more of a relaxed presence there in the upper mids for IEMs, right at around like 3K hertz. And I find that, for the other two in that upper mid-range area, it's just a little bit shouty, while the Tin T2 Plus is a little bit more relaxed there. I do have to say that for a $50 IEM or $50 to $60 IEM, I'm really impressed with the Tin T2 Plus. As I'm impressed with the Blon BL05, if that sounds like it's a little bit more to your taste, if you want something with a bit more bass presence there, that is this IEM. I know the BL03 probably has a little bit more of an agreeable tuning for what my preference would end up being, but if you found that one to be a little bit bass light, this may be the right choice for you. And to be honest, with the Moondrop SSR, I was a little bit disappointed here because, Moondrop is one of my favorite companies in the IEM space here, especially in the more budget IEM space. I think the Starfield that comes in right at around $110 is sort of a benchmark there. And then, of course, the complete game changer that is the Blessing 2 in the $320 price bracket. I was hoping that, this would be a little bit better because, this is a company that I think is really changing things in the IEM space quite significantly. And then, when I heard this, I was thinking, I get what they're doing here. They're going for more of a kind of a, let's say, neutral kind of sound signature, or the less bass elevated and emphasized kind of sound signature with the reference moniker. And that's fine. But I think the problem with that is that if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that it has really good technical performance and really good detail retrieval, so that all of the stuff that's going on in the mids and in the treble is really exciting and is more interesting than whatever the bass punch might give you. It kind of just falls flat a little bit, at least to my ear. I don't really think this is something that I would recommend at the $40 price tag, when you can spend literally $10 more and get the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus. $43 gets you the Blon BL05. Or, to be honest, many of the other previous IEMs that have come out at these price tags as well, I think they probably do a little bit better than the SSR. So while, yes, they do all perform better than what you might find commonly at a big box store for quite a bit more money, I put the SSR in third place here. I put, overall, depending on the type of tuning that you like, I put the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus and BL05 on the same level, but I do personally prefer the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus, just because I think this is the one that has the more balanced signature overall, in spite of the fact that it also has a few little quirks in there as well. It really kind of blows my mind a little bit that it's possible to get this kind of frequency response and extension and overall performance out of IEMs that are this inexpensive. But, as we know, these are the companies who are kind of doing that, and these are the companies that are pushing, the boundaries on that stuff. And it makes it so that, yeah, nobody should be really buying IEMs or in-ear or earbuds or in-ear headphones, at these big box stores that are charging you twice the price for nowhere near as good the performance as any of these. So overall, I do recommend them all, but I don't really recommend the SSR because in spite of the fact that some of its aspects are well tuned, there's just too many things that I think just don't really work with this in comparison to the $5 or $10 more that you'd need to spend to get either of the other two. Other intangible things that are worth mentioning here, the comfort on all three of them is excellent. I actually find that the Tin T2 Plus is the most comfortable for my ear, but really I don't think this is going to be a problem for anybody. They're all fantastic. I hate the cable of the SSR. I love the cable of the Blon BL05, and I have mixed feelings about the cable on the Tin T2 Plus because it's lightweight, but I do find that it's a little bit on the thick side here, so it does get a little bit tangled and caught occasionally, while the BL05 is a little bit more traditional in this sense here. Now, that does it for this comparison here today, but I will be doing some more comparisons and reviews of some of these more budget-oriented IEMs as well, so stay tuned for that in the future. Anyways, if you like what I'm doing here, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.